Right.
Okay.
Step over here.
Good afternoon, welcome. So I'm David Johnson, and with my colleagues here, we're in Microsoft's Core Service Engineering org, which is the organization that is accountable for Microsoft's internal IT operations. So we run our own internal tenancy. And it's really interesting for me here this time is, normally we get to tell the story around how we do it, and I talk about architecture and strategy. This time I've got my service engineer coworkers who do a lot more of a service administration of a tenancy, and so it's a good conversation too around what that means, how we manage Microsoft from an Office 365 perspective. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But just to get going here, we have, just first of all, IT is kind of an, oh, that's not weird, it's actually advancing slides. Do it that way, go to slideshow. Okay, anyhow, well that's going on. So a couple of things. One, we're in the intersection of a kind of a complex situation here that a lot of people are asking us questions. We've got employees asking us, hey, get out of our way. We've got product groups and business groups asking us, hey, you know what? I want to do what we need for my organization. I have Xbox, for example, saying, hey, I want to allow external sharing with gaming studios. I got Intel saying I want to manage external sharing with external partners. So we've got a lot of external collaboration going on. We've got a lot of collaboration going on overall. We have a lot of business integration with obviously LinkedIn and other orgs that want divisional consistency and branding, for example. Not to mention the fact we still have to be legally compliant, security compliant, all the things we generally have to do. So that's all this is. So a little more about this though, and let's talk about kind of what we have. We're a big organization, obviously within Microsoft. We have a lot of stuff, partially because we enable self-service for our employees. Every employee, every full-time employee in the company can provision something, can provision a team, group, SharePoint site. By design, we want to empower them to use our tenancy as opposed to taking the data elsewhere, which is why we have a lot in it. Darren, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, so we've got a pretty big tenant right now. It is 5.8 petabytes of content in Office 365 alone. It spans 3 geolocations, and we currently support 125 different companies within Microsoft. When we break that down...
Oops, sorry, wrong direction.
Oh, wow, we're really advancing through these slides here.
Apparently.
All right.
Go for it.
When we break it down, currently Microsoft has 233,000 individual users. That doesn't necessarily include some of the alternative identities that admins like myself use. We do have 240,000 Office 365 groups currently. We have 233,000 OneDrive for businesses, so they map with most of the user accounts. 124,000 teams, 39,000 Yammer groups, 310,000 SharePoint Online sites, 70,000 of them are still on that classic. One metric we didn't mention is that we have close to 900,000 Azure AD applications as well.
So basically, we're big.
Yeah.
So when we talk about governance for a minute, because this time I'm going to focus a little bit on other governance, because we have solution governance, for example, that we allow people to submit apps to us, for example, a SharePoint application or Teams app or an Office add-in, and we have a whole ingestion process where they give them to us, review them from a security perspective, review them, make sure we're not going to damage the tenancy in any way, that we're comfortable with them, then we'll deploy them in the catalog, and Darren will do that deployment to put these apps in the catalog, for example. We did discovery governance, things like how do we do search connectors against a tenancy? How do we do things like managing best bets and Bing bookmarks? So making sure, again, how do we make sure we've got good discovery services for the company? Just as importantly, we've got the security, obviously, making sure that we're protecting our assets, we're making sure that everything we're deploying in our tenancy, we understand the boundaries. We want to know what data can leave a tenancy when something new is deployed. We want to know how our employees are going to work. We want to enable our employees, absolutely, but at the same time, we're going to protect the tenancy. And lastly, we're going to talk about change management today, because that's really the focus of this conversation, is how we manage our tenancy, especially managing change in our tenancy. I'm not going to focus today on the container governance, because we talked about that in a different session. That's available, actually it was yesterday, and you can look that up. But anyhow, we'll talk more about change management. David.
Yes, so my name's David Hom. I lead the service engineering team that's responsible for how we use services at Microsoft. A couple of the key things that we did around global administration was turn the global administration role into more of a shared service. So we had a world where global admins were siloed in specific services, and that led to us having more global admins than we needed to. So in order to get the population down, we actually turned the establish a process where the request would come in and the people who had global admin rights would be able to do the right thing, and they'd be able to make sure that all the right sign-offs were approved, that all the requests were being vetted properly, the subject matter experts were consulted, and we were really in the world where we wanted to have at least 2 engineers. Devs have always had for a long time the whole peer review, peer engineering happening, and we were trying to do more of that around the administration process as well. So the point number 1, the guiding principle of exercising good judgment, it was to say, if you're being asked to do something and you don't think it's the right thing to do, you've got the right to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm going to escalate. We also are expecting that if you're going to do something, you're consulting the right subject matter expert. So it seems like common sense to say exercise good judgment, but we actually decided to call it out explicitly. Number 2, also talking about making sure that you've got the right air cover. The global admins, they have the keys to the kingdom. And in general, they're trustworthy, they do the right thing, but you also want to protect them from making potential mistakes and making sure that they've got the right business justifications for what they're doing. And then ultimately, it's all about security. The confidentiality, integrity, availability that Darren will get into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, number 3 was really important. Confidentiality, availability, ensuring the integrity of our data, those are major pillars at Microsoft. CIA is incredibly important. To that effect, one of the biggest things we're trying to do is move to a role-based administration model. That would mean that me as a global administrator for Microsoft, I'm aggressively trying to figure out how to get out of that role. How can I go from wearing one God mode hat to having multiple hats that I can wear at the right time? So we are starting with limiting global admins. Every quarter, we evaluate the employees that are global admins, determine what they continue to do. Does it still need global admin? What is keeping them as a global admin? And what type of feedback can we give to our product groups to ensure that potentially some of those global admin level features, if it's only 1 or 2 that are keeping an admin in their role, what can we do to put those into our back roles? And the second thing we do is that we require any global administrator in Microsoft to use a tamper-proof system called a Secure Access Workstation. Ironically, as a global administrator, I am not an administrator on that machine. I can't deploy software to it unless it's been carefully scrutinized and vetted. I can't be making changes to it that could compromise the system. If my account gets compromised, it makes it very difficult to compromise the rest of the machine. They're tamper-proof. I can't tweak a screw on it without causing the whole thing to go bricked. And we use a smart card with no password. So global admins do not have passwords. We use strict smart card authentication, and those smart cards only work on the SAW. We also use just-in-time elevation through Azure Privileged Identity Management so that we are only elevated in the role we need at the time we need it. No other time are we elevated. And for any other employee in the company who serves a critical function, but that function no longer has any hooks in global administration, we work to assign them unique administrative roles specific to Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Yammer. Our CELA team in legal has access only to retention and e-discovery. And security and compliance teams also have access to data loss prevention, label policies, audit logs. Our goal is that those admin accounts still get handled to similar SAW requirements, but if they do get compromised somehow, they're going to have very, very limited attack surfaces that can be taken advantage of. For more information, by the way, we do have some really useful white paper improving security by protecting elevated privileged accounts at Microsoft at aka.ms/protecttheadmin. All right, so we have a change request flow. I'm certain this is going to look very similar to many of you as customers. We try not to cut corners in global administration. We don't try to go to the product groups and get special favors because we want to emulate and adopt that customer experience. The other thing we don't do, which might be counterintuitive as Microsoft, is we don't inherently approve and deploy our own software. If a new Microsoft product comes out, or a new feature comes out, or a new license SKU in O365 comes out, they are not given a blank check to just go into our tenancy and do what they want. Everything we do, whether it be a new feature or service that's announced, or an employee coming to global administration wanting a change that will impact all of Microsoft made, they go through a intake front door process that's internal. We do everything from architectural reviews, security, legal, privacy, and human resource reviews. If the product doesn't meet Microsoft's high bar for internal software, we will not approve it. If it does, and it is approved by the front door team, the request finally comes to my team in global administration. And at that point, we do the final review, make sure that all checks and balances are in order, that everything is good, it will not impact the experiences we've already established. Then we start to move into the deployment phase. That's where we'll review any documentation from our feature teams, our product groups. We review any code or scripts they send along. If every one of those pieces makes sense and allows us to deploy safely, then we'll schedule and track the change in Azure DevOps. When that scheduled change goes live, then we are all good to go.
And Darren, of course, there's always that second person that reviews every
That's
change.
right. Yeah, we always do peer review. So during this entire process, there's going to be 2 members of the global administration team. One thing this helps with is things like phishing and social engineering. Although we trust our global admins are going to be good at spotting those things, it always ensures to have a partner that can say, this looks a little suspect, or did you think about this, or did you forget about this service? Yeah, we work in pairs in global admin.
So, additionally, from a change management perspective, Darren talked about how we drive change from a technology perspective. We also do things like ringing, have deployment rings, so we validate in flight capability, because obviously, like you, we can do first release. We kind of do it, obviously, as Microsoft on kind of bigger scale. We obviously get our bits a little earlier than you would, so we have a flighting that's kind of bigger rings, but normally, just like you, I would recommend, look, we have some people on a first release, we see what's going on, we see what's coming out, we understand, we validate, and that's where we kind of work. After that, though, it's about how are we now changing it? How are we then driving adoption? How are we driving employee understanding? How are we communicating? Making sure our support teams can manage it? All things we then have to do to kind of make sure we can effectively manage the tenancy. So yeah.
All right. So essentially, Microsoft trusts the cloud. That being said, that trust is built on a large assortment of security measures. We do everything from container file classification, retentions, auditing, the role-based administration, DLP, every type of encryption that I'm sure you're all familiar with, compliance reporting, rights management. Some of the latest additions have been enhanced Azure policies, the privileged identity management that we mentioned earlier, and of course, utilizing the Azure Security Center.
Point is, for us, it's defense in depth, right? We want multiple layers of protection. Just like you, we use our own services, we obviously have licenses for everything, although we also have to pay for it, like you, although we pay for it differently. But point is, we have a suite, we manage it, we kind of run our own services like that.
So what did we learn today? We're talking about global admins. How do you ensure that the global admins are working well, that they're covered in what they're doing, that you're protecting them from scrutiny or phishing or any kind of the things that could potentially cause bad actions to happen within your tenant. Using the tools that are available to continue to protect them in their technology. Knowing your configuration. This is one thing that's so important, where understanding where all the settings are. How are you set? Where's the config drift? Has something happened intentionally? Was it a temporary change? Those are all things that we wrestle with, just like everyone else does, and we're trying to get better and better about how we do that. Shadow IT. Your business groups will do what is most efficient for them, right? And how do we become an agile enough of an IT organization so that we're meeting their needs so they don't have to go and do something that will violate policy or will put your data at risk? And then one of the things that we did was around being clear on classification labeling. We went from a label that used to be HBI, high business impact. That could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we shifted over to the term highly confidential. So the taxonomy that we started using, the language was more clear and more accessible for the users.
Great, so let's take a few questions because we have a little bit of time and we got our admins here, so why don't we take some questions. We can't get them all here, so we'll probably take you back to the booth. People who want to follow us will be in the Microsoft, how Microsoft transforms IT booth, formerly IT Showcase. So we'll be there after this session. You can ask us more questions after that, so if people have questions, let's do that, and then after that, I'll reference some other sessions.
I think it's a good time to plug Anne-Marie, who's in this photo. She's doing an excellent OneDrive talk tomorrow at 11:30 in this theater, so if OneDrive is what you're here for, she's got you covered.
I'd say that we also have a lot of other sessions. Click on the link, and there's a ton of sessions available from IT. Plus, a lot of the things we do, like how we migrated to the cloud, that's all documented up there. We've got a lot of white papers we make available through IT Showcase, so definitely check that out. One of those things, by the way, is our Chief Digital Officer, our VP, he has a white paper now on how we transform Microsoft overall, and so that's also another interesting new resource. But why don't we take a few questions if people have any?
When deploying at scale, what are some of the pain points that you guys come across?
Pain points. Well, I guess unique to Microsoft, we have pain points around just some of the early Ring software that gets released. Things sometimes break other parts of the tenant. For instance, we have like a services and add-ins page right now that's not working, so it's making my life in central deployments a bit of a nightmare. But so that's one of our biggest pain points. The other pain point is just the initial configuration. I mean, you know Microsoft products can be configured any number of ways, and that can be a problem when you've got 233,000 folks plus their external customers they want to interface with. Everybody has different ideas of how things should be configured. And by the way, he had a question around how many global administrators we have in the company. For our team, we've got 6. For the specialized teams like security and legal, there's around 15 at the moment, so we're very low double digits.
And they're role specialists. They're not necessarily global admins. They have access to their services.
Yep. Yeah. Any other questions?
I got a quick question. Do you guys, how does Microsoft go in and I guess handle audits of configuration? You just mentioned Microsoft services can be configured a variety of different ways. How do you audit that, or how do you report on what that type of configuration is set up, if it's possible?
Darren actually just recently went through an audit review, so...
Yeah, so we're doing it on a couple different ways, and we're still working on developing more robust internal software strategy for this. But at the moment, we actually do database and capture every single configuration of our major service stack. So how SharePoint's configured, how Exchange, OneDrive, VMware. We actually catalog and database that in Azure. That way, if there's any sort of changes or we have any sort of concerns or post-deployment, we want to validate that nothing has changed, or as we had in one case where we lost our entire SharePoint Online configuration because of a bad deployment that came through, we were able to kind of use these baselines to say, all right, 10 minutes, let's go in, get a global admin there, reset everything to the baseline that we had cataloged, and then anytime we make changes through that approval process, as we track things in Azure DevOps, we're actively updating that catalog of configuration changes.
I just want to add to that, what Darren said. We are an early Ring, so we get broken more often than you by design because we want to break ourselves before we break our customers.
Yep. And part of what Darren was talking about, it's also important that you try to capture the changes that are coming up front, right? So you don't only want to be auditing what has changed, but you also want to be looking at how do you make sure that there is good tracking and approval for things that are supposed to happen and that they are done properly.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also why Darren talked about a change management process. When someone does want a config change, to say, hey, we're going to change the external sharing settings on something, or we're going to enable anyone access in SharePoint, that goes through a very clear process for us as to what that's going to mean.
So I'm just going to add one more thing on this one, because this was also a place that we learned over time. There were changes that have been put into the tenant like 6 months, a year ago, that were supposed to be temporary. And I think we all see this happen, right? Where someone does something, they remember doing it, they remember sort of the reason why, but 6 months, a year later, it's like, have to figure out what's going to break if you set it back to the way it's supposed to be. And those are the things that I'm pushing hard on my team. How do we make sure that we track that up front? If it's for a fixed duration, put a date on it. If you did it for a specific reason, explain what the reason was so that everyone knows.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. We'll take more questions at the booth or just after this. And please give us some feedback. We'd love to hear what worked, what didn't work, how we can make it better next time. Thank you.
Thank you for attending.